Good morning, people. Welcome back to F Politics. Now, back on this side of the Atlantic, both of Donald Trump's demon spawn were invited on to Question Time at the same time last night. Now, if you want to go watch the bit of that episode where both of those men basically got out rulers and started measuring, this isn't the channel for that. This is the channel where we discuss how we argue against the kind of bull those men were spewing. Because Piers Morgan and Nigel Farage do a lot of damage to this country, and they're not going anywhere because news companies keep platforming them. I even joked less than a week ago that Nigel Farage is on Question Time so often he's basically part of the furniture. And that was after Nigel Farage had just been blatantly Islamophobic on Sky News, and BBC Question Time still put him on the show last night. So as I said last week, these news organizations are simply choosing to put out far-right propaganda to the country. Now, the first topic they discussed was the Tories' plans to make 18-year-olds do national service.
I rather like the idea. I'm not sure about the current plans for it.
Okay, so he is for forcing young people to do unpaid labour, but carry on.
There's a strange situation going on with young people at the moment, where there's a kind of epidemic of anxiety, depression, even suicide. And it's been exacerbated by the pandemic and this extraordinary period where they were locked away, couldn't see their friends.
Okay, so you're saying that mental health was a serious problem in the UK before the pandemic. The pandemic just made it worse. But wasn't this you in 2019, just before the pandemic? Literally telling kids they should stop wallowing in self-pity about the normal ups and downs of life and just toughen up because that's not mental illness. And when somebody even told you this is going to come back to bite you, you said, I don't care. So he spent his career denying the mental health crisis, and now he's Mr. Compassion on anxiety and depression? Okay.
I think giving them something which gives them a regular sense of purpose, and I'm talking mainly about the vast body of people, the 700,000 or so who would do just community service, I think it would give them a sense of responsibility, a purpose, and a sense of duty. And I think all those things are perfectly good things.
So instead of giving them well-paid jobs that would give them a sense of responsibility and duty, you're choosing forced labour. But here's where he really leans into the I'm the good guy now thing.
But what about the nation's service to our 18-year-olds? What about our sense of duty to them and what they've been through? And I'm picking up on what Wes said. This is a generation who lost years, the best years of their life. They were banned from going to parties by people who then had a series of illicit parties themselves.
So the problem he's pointing out there is that there were really irresponsible people in government, people who would break the law, lie about it, or, I don't know, disregard the entire medical community when they warned that certain policies would make a pandemic worse. But that was obvious about Boris Johnson for years. And who helped get him elected, Piers? Who was that?
These are people who now can't afford to rent because it's too expensive. They can't afford to buy a home.
The government he helped get elected has built record low numbers of homes. So the houses that exist are obviously more expensive because of supply and demand.
They can't afford to buy food.
He supported Brexit, which made food more expensive.
They probably won't ever earn as much money as their parents.
He supported a Brexit that has made every household £1,000 a year poorer.
They can't see doctors. They can't see dentists. They can't go to A&E without a 15-hour wait.
The Brexit you supported has damaged the NHS.
They can't even go to the sea and have a swim without being covered in sewage.
The Brexit that Piers Morgan supported is one of the reasons that we've struggled to get the chemicals we need to treat sewage.
So when we talk about national service and them doing their duty to their country, why don't we start with a bit of service to them and showing them a bit of duty to safeguard their future?
And the audience claps him for that, even though he didn't actually point to any real solutions. He just pointed to problems that he helped create. And as for Nigel Farage, they did address the elephant in the room of why is he even there, given that while he is the president of the Reform Party, he's not actually standing as a politician.
Which has attracted some criticism because you're not actually standing for election.
No.
So why are then you the person who's fronting the campaign?
Don't ask me.
I'm asking you.
I'm not. Well, you invited me on. I mean, I don't know why you did.
Well,
but, I mean,
we actually asked for Lee Anderson, but anyway, he wasn't going to come on. But anyway.
Now, while you could argue that given that the Reform Party is polling on roughly 11% nationwide, BBC has to be fair and give them a platform. Given that in the last 7 days he has blatantly lied on national TV about Muslims, calling them effectively terrorists, saying that almost half of them supported Hamas, but he was citing a poll that told Muslims to choose between Israel and Hamas, both of whom have committed major atrocities in the last year. So because Muslims don't support a government that the United Nations says is probably committing genocide, he's calling them all terrorists. So even if the BBC has a responsibility to give somebody from the Reform Party a platform, they also have a responsibility to introduce him as a lying Islamophobe. But back to Piers Morgan and his criticism of Labour.
Given your shadow chancellor has just mimicked the Tories and said there'll be no tax rises, income tax, corporation tax, national insurance, now VAT. How the hell are you going to pay for this stuff? There will be no money.
Again, the Brexit that he supported is costing the government finances £40 billion a year, and yet he has the nerve to say, but there's no money left now. But here's my favourite thing, proving that Nigel Farage is a total liar. What he said about the NHS, priceless.
So why don't we think about a different funding model? A completely different funding model. The French have a mutual system where those that can afford pay effectively into an insurance scheme, those that can't afford it are covered, and they are getting a much better return.
Now, while I'm not against the idea of getting the richest people in the country to pay for their own healthcare while also paying tax to support everybody else's, it does open a door which can be a slippery slope to making everybody have to pay for private health insurance, which would lead to massive health inequalities because you'd only get the healthcare that you can afford. So the question is that what Nigel Farage is getting at? Well, the thing is, he's already told us.
And I think we're going to have to move to an insurance-based system of healthcare. Frankly, I would feel more comfortable that my money would return value if I was able to do that through the marketplace of an insurance company than just us trustingly giving 100 billion a year to central government.
He's explicitly said he doesn't want money going to central government. He wants healthcare to be done through the marketplace of insurance companies, which is why Labour's West Streeting comes back with,
I would rather die in a ditch than surrender that fundamental principle of equity that the NHS is a publicly funded public service, free at the point of use, and people should never, ever have to worry about the bill.
And because Farage knows that the British public massively values the equality behind the concept of the NHS, he says,
I am not suggesting we change that principle. What I'm suggesting is a more efficient way of spending the money.
So it's not about where the NHS's money comes from, you just want them to spend the money better? But like 10 seconds ago you said,
we need to fundamentally rethink the way we fund and organise the NHS.
This guy thinks we can't rewind iPlayer. And on the topic of the NHS, the Bishop brings Brexit into it.
I thought that there was 350 million per week that was going to come into the health system.
There's been more.
What happened?
Rose, there's been more. There's been more than that.
What happened?
There's been more.
What happened?
You'll hear a lot of Brexiteers saying, oh, but the NHS has had a lot more than £350 million a week. Yeah, because we went through a pandemic as soon as we left the EU, so of course they had to spend billions more on the NHS. Your job as a Brexiteer is to explain how that money somehow came from Brexit, when all the evidence, even from the government's own experts, says that Brexit has cost our economy £100 billion a year. And let's be clear, Farage knows that's a lie. He admitted it the day after the referendum.
The £350 million a week we send to the EU, which we will no longer send to the EU, can you guarantee that's going to go to the NHS?
No, I can't, and I would never have made that claim.
And Piers Morgan, again pretending to be the good guy these days, says,
Why don't we have another referendum about Brexit? Because economically it seems to have been a willful act of self-harm. And one of the main architects of Brexit is sitting here.
Yeah.
What objection would you have, given that all the polls now say the majority of this country would actually vote the other way if there was another referendum? What objection would you have to just testing that theory and allowing the British people to decide whether they were sold a complete pack of nonsense?
What would be lovely, to get back to the question.
So he's pro-second referendum now. He wasn't before. So what's changed? Is it because we had to go through with Brexit so that we'd at least fulfilled the will of the British people? That argument doesn't work because even in 2019, it was obvious that Brexit voters weren't happy with the way Brexit was going. You had the DUP, a significant part of the Brexit voting population, who were opposed to Boris Johnson's deal. You even had Nigel Farage himself saying,
second referendum on the deal, which no one understands, and staying in the EU.
And
I can see it clearly.
And do you know what, Colin? Colin, Remain wins that referendum and wins it every single time.
So he knew that Brexit would make everybody poorer. He knew that it was no longer democratic to go ahead with it, but he still supported Boris Johnson getting Brexit done. He even argued for a no-deal Brexit, which would have done even more damage to the country, to the NHS, than the one we have now. But worse still, he was incredibly abusive towards anybody who even suggested giving the British people a vote on the Brexit deal that had been negotiated, calling us all demented Ramoners. worse. But it's not really people like me that he was actually making fun of, because I was just speaking on behalf of the people that I knew would be hurt by Brexit. So when he said that Britain just needed to grow a pair, he was making fun of the people that are now struggling to pay for food, the people who are suffering in the NHS. He heard the screams of a country that was begging for this to be avoided, and he laughed in their faces. Because here's the thing with Piers Morgan, he has no principles. He just does what makes him popular. Back when he thought Remain would win, he was anti-Brexit. After the referendum, he was supporting Brexit. Now that he sees the polls have gone the other way, he's against Brexit. Before the election, he was hugely pro-Boris Johnson. After everybody started hating Boris Johnson, he's suddenly against Boris Johnson. And there are human consequences for this. Boris Johnson's handling of COVID was the worst public health failure in UK history. Brexit, according to the government's own estimates, has done more long-term damage to our economy than the pandemic itself. But Piers Morgan isn't guided by what's best for the country, he's guided by what he thinks will make him popular. He is the worst kind of populist. So while he might sometimes say the right thing, it is dangerous to follow people like that. And here's how Nigel Farage responds.
Why did people vote for Brexit? Well, there were lots of reasons. Getting back control of our lives was the main one. Our democracy, governing ourselves, of which, sir, borders were the single most important part.
For him, that's true. In 2016, he said,
"There is nothing we can do to stop unlimited numbers of people from EU countries settling in this country and enjoying the same rights and privileges as all the rest of us."
But just a year after the referendum, I got him to admit that that was a total lie.
Article 7 of the EU Citizens' Rights Directive, which says that in order to come here without a job, you need to have sufficient resources to not become a burden on the social assistance system of the host country and have comprehensive medical insurance.
Femi, in theory, you're right. In theory, under European treaties, there are restrictions that can be placed.
So before the referendum,
there is nothing we can do.
And after the referendum,
there are restrictions that can be placed.
But he still tries to blame foreigners for low wages in the UK.
Big business in this country has an addiction to cheap labour. We've driven down wages for working people in this country.
It's funny how the same people who say our only issue with immigration is that it drives down wages for working people in the UK, the moment the people in the UK actually demand higher wages, how did they respond? Farage accused nurses and teachers who went on strike to demand better pay of being part of a left-wing conspiracy. So they don't actually care about decent wages in the UK, it's just an excuse to attack foreigners. Which brings us to the final point. Private schools and Labour's plans to tax them.
I think it's the worst kind of politics of envy. And then hundreds of kids are going to need to go into the state school system, right? And that is going to swamp our system.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies, who the government regularly use as their experts, say that putting VAT on private schools would only reduce the number of people at private schools by about 3 to 7%. A drop in the ocean compared to the amount of money that could be spent on state schools by taxing private schools. And let's be on the same page on this. What do private schools do for society? They are engines of social inequality. They guarantee that 7% of the population have a better start in life than the rest. And the UK is already one of the most financially unequal countries in the Western world. And when you think about what private schools are, they have smaller class sizes, more money, so more resources are being spent on fewer people. So simply put, this country clearly has all the stuff it needs to teach all of its kids properly. That stuff simply isn't spread around evenly. And what's interesting is watching these two men, Nigel Farage and Piers Morgan, both of whom claim to be champions of ordinary people, but who disagreed at several points throughout this episode, suddenly come together on one issue: private schools.
And to take away the opportunity from some young people, the best possible education available to them.
A bursary who went to a school near here, Reigate Grammar. Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer did.
Keir Starmer.
He did. No.
See, I went to private school for 11 out of my 14 years of schooling, and I learned very quickly that there are two types of privilege. One thinks it deserves it, the other knows it doesn't. I was acutely aware that I had done nothing to deserve the advantages that I was being given at those schools, and so it was my responsibility as an adult to try and level the playing field. These two guys think they deserve the private schooling they got. How the BBC managed to get two of the worst people in the country on that show at the same time without the entire studio being enveloped by the flames of hell, I have no idea. I'm Femi. Make sure you follow F Politics if politics doesn't F you. Have a great week.